So, next step. So the idea is to try and complete the rear door opening. So I'm going to come down here, go around, back up to there. Now what happens here is that I have to pick up the wheel well of the willies, and that's what that will attach to. And here I've got to think about the height that the sill takes, plus the gap in the door, and then I've got a 32mm thick door sill that goes across it as well, so it's going to have to come in, and then about a half-inch 15mm rise for the sill, a second sill to sit against before it then goes in and then comes up. So there's a lot to work out there, so we'll see how we go. I'm not sure which one I'll tackle first, but I can't weld anything on because everything has to come off, so when the chassis rails go through here I can get in and weld them. If I've got all this set up, I can't get to the top of the chassis rail anymore, and it's going to be solidly welded all the way along the unibody here. Alright, I wasn't originally planning to do this in one piece. I'm going to give it a good hot go. So what I'm endeavouring to do is fill in from there to door sill height and then up around that corner. I'm not really sure if I can do it all in one. And what I'm talking about is, that's why it takes these things so long, I had to also work out, I don't know if you can make that line out there, exactly the shape of this wheel arch and how far it has to sit from this edge, because the rear fender or guard comes down here, but I know it peels away slightly at the end, so I had to take that off and then set the guard back up just to make sure, and then tilt this out, and then you've got the thickness of there's a bead or character line, whatever you want to call it, that runs right around the body, and that comes down here, so I had to make allowances for that to sit in there. Then also determine how far I want to step back before having a flange for the door sill to sit on, and then also determine down here how thick the door sill was going to be off the top of the chassis, because this represents the top of the chassis, and then come in and come up, and then had to come around and also miss the enclosure for the front seatbelt rail. So as you can see, there was a lot of working out. So the only thing I've done so far is just to run that reveal where the seal sits for the inner seal, not the outer seal, and goes around there. And then I've got to see if I can tip that whole line there to come up, so that will represent part of this line, because I still got to make the rest. I can't do it all in one piece that way. And this is going to connect to the door seal, but it has to also go around here to meet up with here, and then there'll be another piece. So yes, there's a lot of working out, and I'm going to give it a go, see if I'm successful, and we shall see. Right, it's going about as, I was going to say as well, as hard as I expected. The problem is that I just remember using this as a fulcrum. So as you're feeding this through, I'm pulling up on here, but you've got very little leverage. And also being on a curve, you can see how this is starting to pucker up, even more so here. Look at that. So what that is telling you is that that edge needs to be shrunk to keep that flat as it wants to go through. So I'll do that Here it's almost, as you can see, I've got less tilt all the way through there because it's just the lack of leverage. I'm only trying to pull up on this tiny little flange against that. So I almost feel like putting vice grips on there, or panel clamps, and have a bit of leverage through there, but you'll probably just pull that out instead. I'll have to try something anyway. Well, using the panel clamps worked really well. It gave me that extra leverage I needed to help go through here, and you can see I'm actually as far as I can go before I hit the end there. And you can also see I've been using it in the shrinker to flatten that out. Got a little bit more to do there. On this curve, because it's a inside curve, I've been actually mainly doing it through the English wheel. So stretching that very edge, so I'm putting a lot more pressure on that outside edge. And also I was also using this to tip with. So feeding it through and pulling down and doing that as well. So getting somewhere, we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, we have some progress. It's nice to be able to finally see something after all this working out. Very ridiculous. At this rate, it's going to take me 9 months to do the other 3 doors, but what I have done, I don't know if it was just to challenge myself or not, but I was worried I would get little benefit from making this in one piece. There's no welds anywhere apart from this little tag here on the whole thing. Now, the easy part was cutting out the shape and then adding how much you needed for these flanges, and then all the flanges were tipped. But when you tip a flange on a curve, this part here does not stay flat. And in the case of a convex curve, you need to stretch that edge to get this flat again. Because what it was doing is sinking in this way. So you stretch this edge, which pulls that back out again. So much so that this metal went from 1.2 mil down to 1 mil. So that's the same as going from 18 gauge down to 20 gauge. On an outside curve, I actually went from, because it's a tighter curve, well, regardless, it went from 1.2 mil and now measures 1.3 mil, or what would that be, from 18 gauge to 17 gauge. So, and then all this has to be tipped with the roller, and I also, as I showed, I used the English wheel to finish tipping these. But it's hours and hours of work, where otherwise I would have just put this in a brake press, cut this shape out, and then just rolled this around it and then welded it. That's how I would have done it alternatively, and you could do the same here, or you make this in 2 pieces, so you do sort of all the stretching on this side to get your curve, and then have a weld in there. So yeah, 6 and 1/2 dozen other. You have less room for corrections when you're doing it in one piece. You think, oh, well, as long as you got that shape, but it moves around as you're manipulating all that. But it's, well, it's done. I'm not sure what I'll do for the other side, if I'll do that in one piece again, or do like I said and just cut this out and then roll it around and then weld it in. Especially for that short one there, I would probably prefer to do that, and then you've still got a little bit of movement. With this one here, yeah, I don't know. I prefer metal to get thicker rather than thinner. So anyway, but it's 0.2 of a mil. It doesn't sound much, but what's that? 1/6 of the metal thickness is gone by stretching it just to get this back straight again. So this is only the foundation, the hardest part. Well, there's still a lot more to go. So what is left? Hardest to calculate out. I've been thinking about this for days now. Just off and on, it's usually in the shower or trying to get to sleep. Now, I'll show it on the vehicle in a sec, but this still has to come out, then go down for the seal, then come out and then meet the bead that runs on the body. Now that all sounds like, you know, just a double joggle and then with a curve in it, but the curve is not just for the wheel well this way, but it also has to have that curve that follows the body this way. And I can't just rely on my template because it's travelling backwards at the same time, which means the only way you could do is have this perfectly level left to right and in and out the template, and then try and measure back to here and go, all right, I've got to add 7 mil here, move up 25 mil, oh, I've got to add 9 mil there, and then so on and so forth, and then it starts reducing as the curve comes back again. And then you'd have to keep moving that template, keeping it perfectly vertical in both directions as you take each plot. And that would be just too hard to do on my own, to be quite honest, and I don't know even how accurate that would be. So my thoughts are, hopefully I'm correct, time will tell, is that, say, I use my template, this curve, and then C is because it is at the C pillar, so I know that's there, and I know where the belt line is, which is that one there. I divide this up, and then I know how much it has changed because this is the vertical edge. I know how much this is changing over that distance. Then measure out that longer distance divided by the same amount of segments, but the distance will be greater because it's longer, but each segment would still correlate. So if you go, this is segment 1, segment 2, segment 3, and you would know what those measurements are. And then once this is curved, it should translate. That's what my brain is telling me anyway. So anyway, to show what I'm talking about, this Old Faithful. You can't really see it there. I'll go to the other side where the door's missing. Oh, it's not missing. It's in the workshop. Alright. So basically now I've only got the surface coming here and coming across here, and it's stopping short there. So this is the bead I'm talking about that's on the outside of the body. But rather than having this little 5 mil up, 5 mil out, in, and then up, and then to here, I want to come across this. This is the height I've made it at. So if I come across, go down a big step, and then come all the way across to that bead here. So I'll just have 2 steps. So rather than up 3/16, in 3/16, up, I think it was 16 mil, in another 5. I'm just going to come across, down, so I get a good seal thickness all the way down. So I've got something for the seal to close against rather than this tiny little 5 mil. I had to leave the 5 mil heel for where the hinges are. It's just, that's the way it works with those hinges. I've got no choice. And don't forget, this is the secondary seal. So that's this complex piece that I've got to make. But I can't draw a template off this. For one, it's flapping in the breeze, to I've altered this curve. This has got much more curve than what I've changed the whole body line to be. So I can't rely on that, and that's a different distance as well. So that's why I've got to do everything from scratch, and that's why everything takes so long. As you can see a bit on the outside there. Sorry about for all the sunlight reflecting in. Anyway, that's my next challenge. And there's been so many. Alright, so I just thought 1-inch segments or 25mm segments. So this is where the top of the wheel arch is. So where that curve finishes and hits the door, that's the section I'm making there. So I simply measured the height from the door seal. This is probably going to focus on my finger, isn't it? To the height of the top of the arch. So that's what this is. So C represents C-pillar. This up here is the top of the wheel arch, divided that distance by 25mm, and it was 22 segments. So I drew all that out, then measured how much it changes. So 0.5, 1mm, 2mm, 3mm, etc. 43mm, because the curve gets steeper as it gets to the bottom. And then laid out that same 22 segments divided over the longer distance of the arch, because it's not a vertical distance anymore, it's a curved distance, and it was about 100mm longer. So as you can see here, still starting at the same point, that's where the wheel arch is. That's how much extra, those 3 segments extra, the wheel arch is because of the curve and it going backwards. So that I then plotted all those different measurements onto here, and because I wanted a convex side, not a convex side, convex side, not a concave side. Doesn't help if you say the same word twice. It's just my brain that runs at 100 miles an hour. Alright, so that gives me a shallower curve. As you can see, when you put it next to each other, you can see the curve is shallower. That's why there's a gap in the middle, because it's stretched over that extra distance up the top there. So that can be, I'll know when I've got that first shape. So that shape has got to have all those, that step in it. That's what stock did, and this is how I'm going to make it here. So the stock, it went 5mm, down 13, across another 5mm, down another 5mm, and then had that bead that was 21 and going under. I'll be making mine the same 21 bead, but then stepping back 13mm and going up 17mm. And so getting rid of this little joggle here and making it deeper so I can fit a seal in there. So that's how far ahead you've got to think and know what seals you want to run where. So, you know, like with the window runner, I had to go out and buy them. This one I'm going to use the same ones I used on the truck, so I know what I'm going to get. And so yeah, that's what we're working on now. So now I've got to work out how I'm going to make this joggle this way up to that point there, but also that it curves this way with the wheel arch. So if that's what makes it more difficult. So I could just break it with the extra length that I need, shrink that whole edge to put the curve in, and then tip that last 13mm back up again. So that's one way of doing it. You could do it in 2 segments where you just basically got 2 angles and you curve them both, stretch one edge, shrink the other edge to meet, and then do a weld in between. So that's what I've got to decide on next. Alright, I'm going to try and do it in one piece. So this is going to be the top edge. It's wider than I need, but so that is the edge there that's going to curve right around and follow the curve of that, but it also has to follow this curve here. So what I'll start to do is I'm going to first shrink this edge here, this side, which will cause that side to curve out. Then I've got to shrink this edge, which will curve it to go this way to follow the wheel arch. So the narrow side to do that, to follow that curve. And then this will follow the wheel arch curve, which is that one. There we go. That one there. It's going to focus. Here we go. Something like that. The tricky part is that once that curve is established this way and that way, then this longer edge has to be tipped up again without disturbing that curve or that one, and that will lock it in completely, and there's no more adjustment. And that is to make that second joggle there. So this is the shallow curve, which is the vertical, vertical curve, I guess. And this will be the wheel arch curve, which is the one down there. So that's the second joggle I've got to do after shrinking all of that area, and then I've still got to then put that second joggle in, which means you can't do that in a brake like I just used here. I've got to do that in the tipping wheel. So I won't know success until then. So we'll see what happens. Alright. I've started with that curve. As you can see how that's curved. And so I've just put it into a shrinker here. For those that are not into metalwork, how the shrinking happens, these jaws here, see how they come together, so they're gripping the metal, so your metal's in here, and it grips it and then pulls it together. See that? It pulls it, so it's making, that's what all those tiny little tooth marks are, is it gripping and then making this metal thicker and bending around, and vice versa. If you're stretching, those jaws come down and apart they go, see that? So that's just needed a slight shrink all the way, and this is the important edge here, and as you can see I've just got that right. It will probably move a bit as I start doing the other side. So now this edge here also has to be shrunk, but it has to do the whole lot from there. So it, as you can see now, that's how much that shape has to change. Right, you can see I've started, it's about the third pass through. Now I'm going, most of the shrink happens on the edge, and there should be, like if you did one deep shrink, you'd have 3 shrinks on the edge and 2 shrinks in the middle. So as you can see, I start on the very edge, and then I'm just moving in now. Now, what tells you when to move in, I don't know if it'll show up on camera. You can just see in the reflections there, see those little lumps starting to come up. That means that this is gripped so much that this has got metal needs to also be shrunk in. So that's when I know straight away that I have to come in and then come in deeper. You don't just come straight in deep. You've got to work your way in, and this is your tell. As soon as you start seeing those little lumps, you've got too much material here, so you want to come in deeper, as you can see me coming in now, to start shrinking that. I'm not even in full depth. The full depth is all the way back in there. So that's what, I thought I'd just pass that on. I don't have the luxury of a GoPro or something like that to show you what's happening as far as, let's see if I can do this one-handed, but this shows you what I'm doing. So I'm pushing down on the pedal and you can see the back of it coming up like that. So I'm trying to keep consistent depth and pressure on the pedal. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what's happening. Alright, just double checking to make sure that our left to right curve has not changed, and surprisingly it hasn't, so I'm pretty happy with that outcome. As you can see, it has changed dramatically. I'll get away a bit further in its curve. So one of the things I had to make sure also is that this edge is exactly where you want it. So I wanted to match obviously this radius here, so it was just a matter of putting a square in all the way, running a square all the way up to make sure that this flange here is exactly 90 degrees to that there. And this is, don't forget, this has to start in level with that edge there, so this flange is too long for what this is, so that's why this is tucked in, and it has to hang out 5mm at the top here roughly. So here you can see how that's going to sit like that. Oops. So it's come up really well. I just hope it all stays in there by the time I tip that edge all the way along and then stretch it so this shape is not lost. Because what will happen is it will dive in and out this way when I tip it. So it's all been shrunk along that edge, and now it needs to be stretched along that edge after it's tipped. So otherwise I completely ruin all this. So you hope that enough shrink has happened in this part of the flange that once this is turned, that has not altered, because that is then set. Very hard to move without stretching the outer edge and the whole flange here, which will then upset everything. So anyway, that's our next target, is tipping that flange. All right. Well, it has worked out better and easier than I expected. That doesn't happen very often, so that is good. So you can see minimal gap. it fits in real nice. So the next thing will be to probably put this, if I can, on top of here, and then cut this side back before I weld the two together, because this has got to tuck in a little bit further still. It actually sits better when it's further in. But you can also see that this is actually a straight line, how much that curves in. In fact, final position is that far in, so you can see how much the curve of that rear panels have. So that's the curve over the whole car from one end to the other. So even though I flattened it out, there's still, you can see how much curve is still there, plus what's tucked in behind there. Alright, I might put a picture up. I've got to take some video, but once I cut the excess of this piece here, the curve didn't match anymore, and it was too shallow. So what I've done is I've clamped it in place, and then I've just run the TIG torch as a heat source all the way along there. I'm not welding it, I'm just heating that edge. You can see the heat mark. So just running along the torch there fairly quickly, because I'm not trying to melt it. All I'm trying to do is use it as a heat source. So by shrinking this edge, it will pull that whole radius tighter. So just thought we'll see how it turns out once it's cooled down and the clamps come off. Might have to do several passes. Well, that was really successful. There was about a gap of that much finger depth before I started. So initially just had it freestanding and just heated sections. It moved some, but not a lot. But by putting all the clamps on, as you can see now, it's perfect. It allowed it to cool in position. You can see where I tried to stretch this edge here, and that made some improvement, but then you really need to stretch all the way across here as well. So I was really quite pleased how well this has come out. So bonus, happy about that. Alrighty, all welded up pretty well. Just a couple of little spots here. Normally I go and dig those up. Haven't yet done that, so I've just put it on for the first time. It all seems to line up really well with the correct gaps. Did have a little bit of battling to get this back parallel. I just had to shrink this little edge to push that way, which then increased this curve back up again and got all this square as well. So a little bit of head scratching, thinking why is it tilting away like that? And it's just one of those things with the heat and welding, things move. But overall it's I'd say it's completed. So this is all ready to move on. I'll probably pull these off and put some etch primer on them so they don't rust in the meantime.